Hey y'all, here's a quick run through of what we did on Tuesday morning for lesson 8. This lesson is different. It's not a lesson where you type answers in and do any work. We just went over the information. I just want you to know about it. We're looking all at about reliability of sources for today. So when we're doing our research and our investigation for our voting guide, we're going to be finding lots of information. We need to know if it's reliable or not. So our essential question today is, how can I identify a reliable source? So there's three main parts here. We did a warm-up. We're going to skip that now. We're going to look at this thing called a best test, the bias in news, and then we went over the project, which is covered in a separate video. So to start, here is our definition of bias. It's basically any prejudice in favor or against someone, or a group, or an idea, or a thing. So basically, it's like anything that makes someone look really good or look really bad is essentially what bias is. It sometimes can be bending the facts or highlighting certain things and not talking about other things, or selectively omitting some things. So it's pretty complex and nuanced, but I really just need you to know if your source is reliable or not. So if you check out this link down here, it might display better if you open it up on as a web page. So that's why I included the link. But basically, this is this really cool chart that was created for us to help understand reliability and bias. So here's how it works. The vertical axis, the y-axis, shows us this. How reliable is this information? So you see if we go all the way up, we have very original fact reporting, just the facts, no opinion, just the evidence, just the facts. At the very bottom is very like inaccurate or even fabricated information, like created information. So you see at the very bottom, like the National Enquirer is kind of like this gossip magazine. They're not super factual. They're kind of designed to be provocative and sell magazines. Whereas at the very top, we have AP, the Associated Press or Reuters, which is very fact-driven news reporting. So that's all we're looking at, and we go up and down. When you look left and right, we're looking at bias. So left, sorry, I'm mirrored in the video, but left is liberal leaning and right is conservative leaning, or put another way, left is kind of Democrat leaning, right is more Republican leaning. So what we see is the further to the edges that a source is, the more biased they are. The more to the center the source is, the more unbiased that they are. So for example, we can see something like the Weather Channel or CBS is in the center. They're not trying to convince you one way or another. They're just like giving it to you pretty straight. Whereas when we get down, you'll see this very interesting like pyramid or triangle shape, where as we go down, the news sources kind of flare out to the side. So two really similar contrasting examples is like MSNBC, which is like mainstream but liberal leaning news, and like Fox News, which is also mainstream and right leaning or conservative leaning news. So when you find a source and you're asking yourself, like, I wonder where this fits, check out this site. They also have an interactive guide where you can actually just like type in your source and then it'll just generate on an empty graph to show you where it falls, which I think is really cool because this does get a little busy and sometimes it can be hard to find what you're looking for in this. But use this as a guide. Also in our voting guide, I kind of like translated all of that stuff here. So I have it just in columns of like very left leaning and very right leaning and then stuff that's more in the center. So you can also use this if you'd like. Another thing we looked at, here's a video if you want to watch it, explaining like the creation of this graph. This woman here in Colorado did it, this lawyer in Colorado, it's super cool. So check out that video if you want. And then the last thing we looked at is this thing called the best test. And basically when you're looking at a source, I put this on a separate doc just so it's easier to see if you'd like, so you can click that link. But basically there's four things when we're looking at when we're seeing how reliable a source is in addition to just the bias. So we covered all the bias, that's the first thing. The next thing we want to look at to make sure our source is reliable is to make sure the evidence is coming from an author that's legitimate, from a news source that's legitimate, and like where is this evidence being drawn from? You can even just like Google the journalist to see who they are. Another thing is that most sources in an article or a video will be cited very clearly if they're legitimate. So you can track them down. So one strategy you could do is just like Google something from the article and see how if it pops up in other sources or if it goes back to the original source. The most legitimate sources the most reliable sources will very clearly cite where the information is coming from, and those people will be reliable. So you could do a little digging to figure that out. The last thing is timeliness. If we're looking at an article from 5 years ago, it's kind of irrelevant. Like we need stuff that's within the last year or two, ideally stuff that's within the last year, because things change really quickly, and the more current, the better. So keep this best test in mind when you're looking at sources, in addition to looking at this news media. And remember, the sources that we're looking at, it could be anything. News doesn't just come in online. It could be video news, it could be printed news, it could be a lot of different things. So I hope this helps you. Let me know if you have any questions.